Welcome, everyone. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online conversation about the Epic of Everest. We've got 45 minutes and we're going to use the time very well. A bit of housekeeping at the beginning. If you're watching on Zoom, welcome to you. We have, you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see you can put questions in the Q&A function. Other people can second a question already posed by somebody else just by clicking the thumbs up on a question that you'd like to hear answered. If you're watching on the Facebook Live pages of HippFest or the Hippodrome or DCA in Dundee, welcome to you also. And you can pop any questions that you have in a comment, and the wizards behind the scenes will try and feed those through to us on the panel. This conversation is going to be recorded, and then it's going to be available to view afterwards on our website and on Facebook as well. We'll try to speak slowly and clearly, but there are also captions on Zoom. You can just click on the CC icon in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen, and you can then choose either subtitles or a transcript. You won't be able to see captions if you're streaming live on Facebook, but we're going to be adding captions to the recorded version, so you can always catch up with that later. So now I'd like to ask the panelists, Bryony and Stephen, to turn on your cameras, and I can introduce you. Hello there, you two. So Bryony Dixon, welcome and thank you for joining us. Bryony is the Curator of Silent Film at the British Film Institute National Archive. She's a writer, an author, author of the BFI Screen Guide on Silent Film, indispensable for people like, well, anybody really. Programmer of festivals and events worldwide, co-director of the British Silent Film Festival, and also the lead curator on numerous high-profile restorations at the archive, including, of course, the Epic of Everest. So, Bryony, thank you for joining us.
We've to say I'm here.
Yes, you're here in Everest. It's like Everest. We're there. And we have Stephen Horne here in his room, not in Everest at all. Stephen Horne will be accompanying the film, though, The Epic of Everest, live at the Hippodrome this Saturday evening and also at the DCA on Sunday afternoon. And Stephen is an internationally acclaimed silent film musician who performs his own compositions and improvisations at the finest festivals across the world. And he recently, by the way, released an album called Silent Sirens. And I'm assured that he's going to bring copies of Silent Sirens with him to the screenings in Dundee and Bowness. So if you want your signed copy, you can come along and buy them off him, by their beautiful piano music. It's beautiful piano pieces inspired by the heroines of silent film. So we're all looking forward to the live screenings at the weekend of an exceptional film, The Epic of Everest. And I'm conscious that not everyone will have seen it before, but I think everyone will know that it's a record of the 1924 attempt to reach the summit of Everest. And it's an attempt that's perhaps best known perhaps for culminating in the deaths of two of the finest climbers of their generation, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine, and also for the ongoing debate about whether or not they actually reached the summit. So I'm going to kick off with a question for Bryony, if that's okay. The film was made, and I gather largely funded, by Captain John Noel, and the little bit of reading I did around him, he just sounds like an extraordinary character. Could you tell us something about him?
Sure. Yeah, he's an incredible figure, really. He's an army man, son of a sort of minor aristocrat, or grandson of a minor aristocrat, and he's born in about 1890, and joins up, like most guys of his class, and goes off to India, where he's serving in the army. And while he's there, he goes to Tibet. So he goes over the border, which is not allowed He disguises himself as a Muslim Indian and goes with some local hillsmen and tries to get to Everest. So Everest by this time has been measured, and we know that it's the tallest mountain in the world. So he gets, I think, within 40 miles before he's captured and sent back. So he doesn't make it. And then, of course, the war happens. So he is dragooned into the trenches, of course. So he's at several very important battles. He gets invalided out with shell shock. But then after the war, he goes to give a lecture to the Royal Geographical Society. So this is in 1919. And he describes his journey to the bottom near to Everest within 40 miles. And they get very excited, and eventually they get permission from the Dalai Lama, who sort of pulls some strings, courtesy of a guy called Sir Charles Bell, who's a diplomat, who makes this arrangement for them to go. Very heavily caveated, there are things that they can't do. They can't do any prospecting or geology while they're there, for example. You know, so it's very much like, you know, you come in, you go to the mountain, you go back. So they set up this expedition. They go in 21, they go back in 22, and Noel goes with them. And he makes his first film, Climbing Mount Everest, in 1922, which is big success, a really big success. And so then when they plan to return in 24 to make the next assault, they've learnt their lessons. They really know what they're doing this time. And this is a very serious expedition. And by this time, Noel has learnt much more about how to photograph in those conditions and how to make a film. So he's appointed as the official photographic historian for the 24 expedition. So that's how that starts.
So, and you talk about he learned how to cope with the conditions, and you know, the film really does reveal how challenging those conditions were. What they were experiencing, the high altitudes, freezing temperatures, remoteness, and really the mind boggles about the practicalities of how he managed it. And there's a little title at one point, I think it says, "We were physically incapable of carrying our camera any higher." So how did he manage to work in the conditions, and how did he overcome the difficulties?
Yeah, I mean, there are several problems you get in that environment. One is if the sun is out, because it's so high up, it's absolutely boiling. And then as soon as the sun goes off, it's below freezing. So you've got to cope with extreme heat, extreme cold. The other problem you get is static. Because the air has little oxygen in it, static can be set off. So if you are hand cranking a camera, for example, your touch will set off little sparks which ruin the film. Sometimes you see them on old films, they're like a spidery network, and that's static. Wow. So what he did was, first of all, to deal with the heat, he took Newman Sinclair cameras with him that were very tough. So he'd researched this with Herbert Ponting, who photographed the Scott expedition in Antarctica, and he told him, you know, you have to cover the camera with rubber, so that if you touch it, like with your nose, when you're leaning in, you don't freeze to it.
Like your tongue sticking to an ice lolly.
Exactly. And then they had to sort of make the boxes white so that the sun would reflect off them and it wouldn't heat up. And then there were, as you say, there were places you just couldn't get to because you couldn't get up that high or carry the cameras. So he also took with him a very, very long telephoto lens, which was made especially for him. The Leicester company called Taylor and Hobson, who made this lens for him. And there is the great shot in the film where he's looking at the climbers, Mallory and Irvine, on the last leg. And he's got, I think it's 2 miles away. So that's how long. It's a massive long lens. So he really knows what he's doing. You know, he's planned it meticulously. He's set up a laboratory in Darjeeling that's going to handle a film. And he spent a lot of his own money, so £8,000 buying the rights, which went to finance the expedition. £8,000 is about £400,000 in today's money, if you can imagine that. So it's a very serious endeavour.
And so was he developing, where was he developing the film? Do you say in Darjeeling? So got it from the mountain?
Yeah, in the first film, he developed it all on his own in his tent, and he set up a special tent, and he only had yak dung to heat up chemicals and stuff like that. So you can imagine he got pretty fed up of that after a while. So the undeveloped film was sent by runners and ponies and yaks and all sorts of things overland in relay teams to Darjeeling, where it was developed. It's a right old faff. I mean,
but the film really does convey that sense of the awe, how awe-inspiring the mountain is, and how thrilling. But it's also, paradoxically, there's quite a lot of understatement, and so the text has descriptions of dramatic scenes and says things like, Norton, Somervell and Mallory, by sheer mountaineering skill, reached the men and saved their lives. And it's just like something very, very dramatic has happened, but it's just a throwaway or a very brief line, and we don't really hear or learn much about what the men are feeling, their interior lives. And I just wondered for you, Stephen, is how that is for the musician to play. Does it leave a great burden on you, that you have to fill in the thrills that aren't necessarily depicted?
Well, I don't think you necessarily have to be honest. It is a challenging film to accompany, but also very rewarding. The main challenge is that it moves at such a steady pace. There are very long held shots of the mountain and nature. So, you know, it's important to resist the temptation to sort of force sort of crowbar drama into a scene that isn't there. I think if I have any kind of guiding principle in the way I accompany films, it's I try to play what I see and what I think the film is trying to make me feel. So if the film isn't talking about the emotions that the participants are feeling, I won't try to put it there, because there's so much else to play. I think I'll be playing the quest and the nature and the slightly kind of mystical quality that's there from the beginning, and that grows, that gets more important as the film goes along. So it's quite a different film to accompany in that respect.
Yeah, but it's because you don't want it to be sort of funereal all the way along.
Well, yeah, I mean that's quite appropriate for the ending, but the way the film evolves is sort of, you know, it's kind of quite imperialistic, and you know, it's like we're going to conquer the mountain because it's there. Mm-hmm. But the tone does shift towards the end, and that almost the strange sort of element of humble pie creeps in towards the end, I feel. Uh-huh. The title sort of almost says, well, maybe we've bitten off more than we can chew here. So yeah, it sort of just moved with the flow of the film, really.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that really establishes that sense that you talk about, the mysticism and the awe of it, is the color effects, actually. And I think, as you know, you're people often assume, don't they, that silent film is synonymous with black and white film, but it really bowled me over, and that's even just watching it on a little small screen. The color. Can you, Bryony, tell us a bit about how color was used in the original prints, and how he achieved those effects? No.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the
restoration.
It's one of the great things that we were able to do in the restoration is to recover the colour. Most people will know that silent film is often coloured by this process. So you basically, dip the film in dye, or you process it with chemicals to give various lighting effects. Now, in his book of the expedition, Noel describes fairly precisely various colour effects of the landscape, and how it's changing all the time, as the sun changes with the mountains. And he tries to be relatively accurate, but it's also got this sort of expressionistic quality, which probably Stephen can talk a bit more about. But there are sort of shots of the mountain with sort of pink and red lighting, which would be, sunrise and sunset, which give it a kind of brooding quality. So it was great to be able to bring that back. And the cold with the ice, and the sort of pale blue is very effective. So the way we did it was we were working with two different sources. We had Captain Noel's own personal film print, which was in quite good condition, and we had an old release print, which would have been in the cinemas at that time, and that was the one that had the colours in it. So we had to sort of take the quality picture and the colour and sort of make a kind of composite. When you scan a print digitally, you have RGB, red, green and blue LED lights, which you can play with and balance to create certain colour effects and sort of play with the kind of gamma of the film as well. And our restorer, Ben Thompson, sort of developed a system for doing that, so that when you add the colour, you don't build up contrast, so you can't sort of see through it. So very clever, he's a clever boy. And so we were able to sort of bring all those things together. So it's a mixture of old-fashioned photographic printing technology and digital work. So we're not colorizing like you will have seen on the internet, excuse me, with people, coloring in black and white images. It's all properly done according to the original artifact as he instructed the original guys who were making up the prints.
And you really do get a sense with that wonderful restoration work of how much the mountain is shown to its great effect, to its great advantage, and it's such a big presence in the film. Obviously, it's like the star of the film, really, the mountain. The film's intertitles, they emphasize the Tibetan name of Everest, Mountain Mother, or Goddess Mother of the World. And there's times as well when the titles refer to the mountain as frowning, it's anthropomorphized, it's got this character. And I wondered, Stephen, you talk about you'll try and play what you see and what you think is going on. So what's going on for you with the mountain? What does the mountain represent for you? And you talk, it's interesting.
Well, again, it's the question is more, what does the mountain represent for the film? And trying to sort of find a musical parallel for that. And again, I think it represents a challenge at the beginning, something to be conquered, and then towards the end, it becomes this rather fearsome, incomprehensible, sort of otherworldly feature of nature. So I remember we had a screening in San Francisco where I had Frank Bocchius, the percussionist, with me, and we had this huge, great gong, which Frank would play every time there was the sort of reference to the Tibetan name of the mountain, which kind of shook the building, which was rather great. I can't really find a way to match that, but I think it's about that really. It's trying to sort of create a feeling of otherworldliness overall.
Yeah, I like the idea that you say about how it changes, it evolves through the film, and that there's that at the end. There's sort of, maybe there is something to it that it's that the mountain won out in the end.
Yeah.
So you talk about the gong, and one of the things you're famous for, Stephen, is the arrangement that you play lots of instruments at the set in your performances. So can you give us a flavour of? Is it too much of a spoiler to tell us what we can expect on Saturday and Sunday when you play live?
No, sure. As long as we can all fit it on the stage. I'll be having my usual trio of piano, accordion, and flute. Accordion doesn't seem quite right, but you can use it as a drone, which is...
Sorry, I missed that bit. You said piano, accordion, and flute.
Yeah.
And what can you use as a drone?
Yeah, the accordion can be used to create a drone effect, which is quite useful. And also there's this famous scene towards the end where they have to use oxygen gas. And I use this breath effect of the wind button on the accordion, which sounds very much like breathing. So if you play that into the microphone, it sounds very much like people struggling to breathe, which can be a bit freaky. And then going full exotic, I have Tibetan bells and glockenspiel. What else do I have? I have a kind of zither kind of thing and a thumb piano. It's all kind of, it's not so much trying to be authentic to Tibetan music as to create a sort of an otherworldly feel and different colors.
And for anyone that doesn't know, what is a thumb piano?
Hang on a minute.
Wow.
Such a great instrument.
I love that. Can you hold it up so we can see it or describe it?
Yeah.
So it's like a small wooden plate with metal and just metal.
Like a drum membrane.
Okay.
And these are the keys. It's good,
it's a really
the effect of light on ice and snow.
I love that. And I was reading about when the film was when it was premiered, and all the lengths that Noel went to make it an immersive experience. And drums crafted from human skulls was one of the things that was mentioned. I don't know if that's true, but you haven't got anything like that up your sleeve then?
No skulls. No.
No skulls. But yeah, that brings us round, I think, quite nicely to talking about the Tibetan. You talk about how you suggest Tibetanness in the music, and we should talk about the depiction of the Tibetans in the film. Really, it is quite noticeable when you watch it as a modern audience that sometimes the titles are a bit condescending and imperialistic. They talk about the people living in hovels and in not washing their whole lives, and think it's a bit jarring and unpalatable watching today. But I thought, Bryony, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts as a curator on the considerations for an audience watching the film today in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, you know, with any film of that period, you're going to get this kind of thing. You know, Noel was an imperialist. He was at the heart of the British Empire project, so unsurprising that he would have those attitudes. In fact, with these particular titles that you're talking about, he's actually talking about something very specific, which it's then easy to read as kind of general comments on the Tibetans themselves. And in fact, if you read his book, Through Tibet to Everest, which he published in 27, he explains this in more details, a little bit of context. So he's talking about this particular town called Phari, which is it's a kind of crossroads town where they are trading animals. So when you move from the plateaus coming across from India up into the mountains, you need a certain sort of pack animal. When you go up into the higher mountain ranges, you need other kinds of animals. So this place is all about trading animals and butchery. So the whole place is like a shambles, you know, old-fashioned shambles, with butchers and slaughterhouses and stuff. So the place smells terrible, and everything's very grubby and dirty, and there are dogs and babies rolling around with bones, and you know. So he describes this in great detail, but he doesn't intend this to represent his view of the whole of, you know, Tibet at all. And he, in fact, in the book goes to great pains to say that it's not like that elsewhere, and he's full of praise. He really likes the Tibetans as people, and he's full of praise for them in many ways. So it's not quite as simple as it comes across in the titles, which really does sound, as you say, rather patronizing and slightly insulting. And in fact, he did get into trouble for this even at the time. I think he was a bit naive, frankly, and hadn't really thought about how it would come across. So yeah, you have to explain these things where you can to people.
That's really interesting to hear that background context about what he was intending. There's a question that's in the Q&A chat that I'd like that's directed to Stephen, and it's, did you get to listen to earlier soundtracks? Did they utilize a similar number of instruments that you're using? So maybe either when it was originally presented, sound, music, or other interpretations.
The only score that I've heard a little bit of was the one that was commissioned for the BFI restoration. In general, I prefer to avoid listening to other scores, just because I'm like the world's most suggestible person, and I'd end up I'd just do an inferior version of someone else's score. In terms of some sort of in a more broader sense, people often ask me, do I try to play the music that might have accompanied the film when it was first released? You know, sort of a question of musical authenticity, or do I play modern music? And the truth is, I try to, rather than producing time-specific music, I try to create timeless music. So it's just a score. It's just music that's, you know, hopefully getting close to capturing the spirit of the film. The only authenticity I strive for is to try to stay true to the spirit in which the film was made. But then that can become problematic if you're playing for, I mean, I don't know what I would do if I was accompanying the birth of a nation. Because according to that philosophy, I'd have to play the Ku Klux Klan as though they're heroes. So to be honest, I just would turn that gig down. I just wouldn't accompany it.
Talking to Bryony earlier, she raised an interesting point as well about how basically the music, that the people's reading and perception and understanding of music is different now and their sort of the sort of language of music that people could have recourse to is different now for audiences to audiences at the time. Bryony, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that. You were talking about the sort of Tibetan soundscape that we might have in our heads.
We do, yeah. I mean, we've watched lots of films and telly and seen stuff on YouTube and what have you. So there's a kind of there are conventions, particularly television makers, are always putting appropriate music to images, so that we have a sort of collection of, if you imagine, this scene here behind me, you've got Tibetan monasteries, you'll be thinking of bells and those long mountain horns that they blow to, across the mountain valleys, and I don't know, bells on cattle, that sort of thing. And in fact, that's what Noel tried to recreate at the original premiere of the film in London at the Scala in Charlotte Street. He brought in several monks. He brought them to London. And there are fantastic pictures of them in the illustrated press, in taxis with their, fantastic headdresses and what have you, going to the Scala to accompany the film with their long, long horns that they brought all the way, and drums and the skull drums and everything. Don't know if they really were skulls, but
we like to imagine they were.
And of course, the contemporary audience, who are used to hearing kind of light classical for their film scores, thought this was all very weird. And of course, I think Noel was trying to add atmosphere and authenticity to his film, and I'm not sure it quite came across. And he then got into terrible trouble for having basically sort of kidnapped a bunch of monks, and they were banned from going back to Tibet. So there were no more expeditions to Everest for an entire decade after that.
There's a question in the chat, in the Q&A, that is a little bit about the original exhibition, and it's saying generally with these, so Grass, the documentary that we're showing on Saturday at the Hippodrome, and Everest, documentary films, says this questioner, and were these kinds of films popular and shown widely in cinemas in the 20s?
Oh, hugely popular. The Everest film, the films of the Antarctic expeditions, things like Flaties, Nanook of the North, Moana, they were massively popular, every bit as popular, if not more, than the feature films, the fiction feature films of the time, with film stars in them.
So
and they had a long shelf life.
There's another question on that about specifically Everest expeditions. So were there lots of Everest films?
Was the two that Captain Noel made. There was, I think, the next one after that is Wings Over Everest, which is an aviation film where they fly over the top of Everest and take pictures from the air. And then the rest of it becomes more like footage, reportage, I think, until 53, the big one, when they obviously Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing make it to the top finally, and then they make a film of that. And then of course the first woman, let's not forget the first woman to make it up to the top of Everest, who was Japanese, Junko Taipei, 75. They haven't made a film about her yet.
Well, I feel there should be a film about her, and there should also be a film about Captain Noel, his story sounds spectacular as well. I'm conscious that we're nearing the end of the time, and I know there's lots more to talk about, but one of the things we really have to talk about is the ending, and you allude to it really when you mention about when they're finally successful in the 50s. But we can all think of films where we know the ending, and it's like, so it's not really a spoiler alert, for example, to say that the ship sinks at the end of the Titanic. But as we're watching just now, just like the audiences then, we all know that Mallory and Irvine didn't survive, and it's flagged early in the film as well. So I just wondered about the paradox that is for you, Stephen, how you deal with that sort of balance of suspense. I mean, maybe you've answered that already with you say you play what you see, but just that particular thing about you know the ending, but it's kind of to discover as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I assume the film was made for an audience that also knew the ending. But at the same time, that's not flagged up in the first half of the film, really.
About 30 minutes in, I think it is. But, yeah.
Right. But again, it's a film that unfolds slowly. So if you just go with the flow of the film, then you kind of incorporate a feeling of inexorable doom into the music. I think that shot that Bryony referred to, the telescopic shot, is sort of a really interesting one to play for. I've used that a couple of times in masterclasses because although it's technically amazing, to a modern audience, what you're seeing is a distant mountain with tiny little dots slowly going up. Without the context of what's actually going on, there's not much to play there because it's very sustained. But when I sort of give that to a masterclass, I say, those tiny dots are dots going to their death. How do you play that? I sort of tend to cheat by using musical effects. If I were to do it just on the piano, I think the strings of the piano are useful to play at this point because you can sort of create this sort of a shivery wind kind of effect, and also the chilliness of and sort of isolation of their situation. So you can play a chord on the piano and then pluck a single string, and that will sort of, it also has this sort of slightly kind of distanced effect, like the music is reaching you from a great distance. But again, resist the temptation to, make it sort of turbulent, because you can't have along the shot is 2 minutes of turbulence for just a mountain with dots moving up. You have to find another way to create tension.
And so you posed the question, Stephen, what the audiences at the time would have known. And so, Bryony, was there the debate raging as then, right at the time, about whether or not they got to the top?
Absolutely, yes. And again, Noel writes about this at some length. The expedition, when it was clear that they were not coming back, there was a lot of speculation on whether they had got there. The last person to see them before they made their final assault was Odell, and he saw them on the final, what they call the pyramid, which is the very end peak of Everest. They're 600 feet away from the top at that point. So it's perfectly possible they made it to the top and then perished on the way down. We really don't know what happened, got no idea. And we may never know.
I mean, there's more, lots of, you can go online, maybe audiences, and look at what the various theories are, and what people have considered to be proof that they did or proof that they didn't. But it really obviously resonated with audiences then as much as it resonates with audiences now. And so just as we're wrapping up, maybe both of you, maybe start with Stephen, you could tell us what you think the audiences who are going to go and see the film on the big screen, either in Bo'ness or in Dundee at the weekend, what would you like them to listen out for, particularly, Stephen, or scenes that that are really strong for you? And same question for Bryony, scenes that you'd like people to really you'd like to draw their attention to. I don't mind who goes first.
Well, I don't know if I want them to listen out for things. Obviously, they're going to hear the different colors of the different instruments. But I want that to be a soundtrack. I don't want them to be thinking, oh, look at that great multitasker over there. That's not really what's important. It's to try and create color and a sense of sort of discombobulation to some extent. I think the film, for all its problematic elements, is ultimately quite moving and also very enigmatic. I've got a perverse love for enigmatic endings. And it's got that slightly kind of picture at hanging rock kind of quality about it. It's left on a great big question mark.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not so much about individual scenes. It's about this sort of, this slow, inexorable advance towards the end. And
yeah,
I think
I kind of agree. It's the journey, isn't it, that's really important. And I think also for me, what's so great about it is this opportunity to see, the virgin snows of Mount Everest. I think me and Ali were talking about the absolute shock of seeing that photograph that was released a year or two ago about this sort of queue of people going up Everest. It was really quite shocking. And in this film, you see this virgin territory. Nobody has photographed this before or been allowed in to see it or got to the bottom of Everest and has seen it. It's incredibly poignant, and I think that's the thing about the film is you go on the journey with them, and so the pace is correct for the journey that we're taking, and then it sort of builds up to the climb and this sort of climactic ending, which is very, very sad and very poignant, I think, and particularly for that generation of men who'd been through the trenches and had the most terrible time, and they were absolutely desperately yearning to be in this wilderness and just pitting themselves against nature, with none of the sort of horrors of modern life. So I think it's a wonderful film from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think you don't have to be like a mountaineer necessarily to really find it speaks to you, I think. But like you say, that the sense of nature and of being in amongst it, I think really you must come and see it on the big screen. So, and just to remind everybody, it's on Saturday, this Saturday, the 25th of September at 7:30, and again at the DCA the following afternoon at 3 p.m. And that'll be with Stephen's live accompaniment with all his array of instruments, including the thumb piano. So, and just a final note to say, don't miss, if you possible, don't miss Grass, A Nation's Battle for Life. One of the, as Bryony said, so many popular documentaries of the time. That one really is a standout. It was from the creators of the original King Kong, and they bring all of that showmanship and flair to that film as well. And in October, the Taste of Silence season is carrying on. We have Chicago with live music by John Sweeney, the original Chicago, as in Bob Fosse. And we have Haxan suitably on Halloween, the history of witchcraft, with live music by Jane Gardner and Hazel Morrison. So I hope you'll join us at that. And thanks again to our panelists, to Bryony Dixon and to Stephen Horne. Thanks especially to Greg there for doing the BSL, and for our captioners in the background. Thank you very much, and good night.